27-year-old Stanislaw sat in the back of a luxury sedan, staring at the fresh gold band on his finger, while his father and his new bride shared a glass of vintage champagne in the suite upstairs. 30 minutes after saying, "I do," Stanislaw walked into the bridal suite to find his father, Robert, holding Lucy against the mahogany desk, their lips pressed together in a hunger that didn't belong to family. The silence that followed was the sound of a billion-dollar empire fracturing at the seams, leaving a young man to realize he had been the only one not in on the secret of his own marriage. Hello friends, welcome to our story. We are so glad you could join us today for this incredibly moving and dramatic journey. If you haven't already, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story like this one. We love hearing from our community. Please tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Whether you are in New York, London, Canada, or perhaps South Africa, we want to welcome you. Now, let's settle in as we dive into the first part of this complex tale of betrayal and power. The reception at the Fairmont was a sea of white lilies and crystal, a $5 million testament to the union of the Thorne family legacy and Lucy's grace. Stanislaw, known to the business world as Stan, was the sole heir to a tech conglomerate that spanned 3 continents. At 27, he was often described as the calm hands of the firm, a stark contrast to his father, Robert. At 53, Robert Thorne didn't look like a man in his 50s. He was a sculpted force of nature, a man who treated aging as a negotiation he was winning. Since Stan's mother passed away 7 years ago, Robert had become Stan's only true north, a mentor and a father who seemed to have finally approved of his son's choice in a partner. The wedding had been perfect until the moment Stan felt a slight headache from the flashing cameras and decided to slip away to the private suite to grab his migraine medication. He didn't knock. It was his suite, his wedding, his wife. When the heavy oak doors pushed open silently on their hinges, the world slowed down. He didn't see a moment of weakness. He saw his father's hands, those familiar, powerful hands that had signed his trust funds, gripped around Lucy's waist. He heard Lucy, the woman who had promised him eternity an hour prior, whispering that she couldn't wait for the honeymoon to be over so they could find their time again. Stan didn't scream. He didn't throw a punch. He simply stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, the clicking of the door latch sounding like a gunshot in his mind. To understand how a man could stand at his own wedding reception and watch his father steal his life, one has to look back 6 months. Stan had been called away to Singapore to oversee a critical merger, a month-long trip that he felt guilty about leaving Lucy for. Lucy was 25, a brilliant interior designer with a modest background, or so she had presented herself. Stan, wanting her to feel like part of the family, suggested she spend time at the Thorne estate to help Robert with the redecoration of the East Wing. He thought it would bridge the gap between his reserved father and his future wife. He thought he was being a good son and a loving fiancé. Robert Thorne was a man who collected beautiful things, and Lucy was the most vibrant thing to enter that house in years. It started with polite dinners and discussions about upholstery, but Robert knew how to play a role that Stan hadn't mastered yet. The role of the provider who demands nothing but presence. While Stan was on Zoom calls at 3 a.m. in Singapore, Robert was taking Lucy to private galleries and gifting her rare vintage watches, just because she was family. The power imbalance was subtle at first. Lucy found herself admiring the raw, polished authority of the father, a man who didn't just manage wealth but seemed to exhale it. One rainy Tuesday in the library, the tension shifted. They were laughing over a shared bottle of 1945 Bordeaux when Lucy looked at Robert and saw not a father-in-law, but the man Stan was still trying to become. The kiss was initiated by her, a desperate, curious reach for a level of power she had never touched. Robert, a man who never denied himself a conquest, didn't pull away. That afternoon moved from the library to the master suite, a room Stan hadn't entered since his mother's funeral. For the next 5 months, through the engagement party and the dress fittings, they lived a double life. Lucy loved the gifts, yes, but she loved the feeling of being the secret of the most powerful man she had ever met. Back at the reception, Stan stood by the tall windows of the ballroom, watching his father descend the grand staircase 5 minutes after he had. Robert looked impeccable, smoothing his silk tie with a wink toward a group of investors. Lucy followed shortly after, her makeup touched up, her smile radiant and practiced. Stan felt a cold, clinical detachment beginning to take root. He realized that if he confronted them now, in front of the press and the dignitaries, Robert would use his legal team to crush him. Robert owned the firm, the house, and, apparently, the bride. Stan realized he wasn't just a husband. He was a placeholder in a game he hadn't known he was playing. He approached Lucy at the head table, his voice a low, steady hum. He leaned in as if to whisper a sweet nothing, but his eyes were like flint. He told her she looked beautiful. He told his father the toast was excellent. Inside, Stan was already running through the bylaws of the Thorn Trust. He remembered a specific clause his grandfather had put in place, a clause regarding moral turpitude and the transfer of voting shares. If a member of the board committed an act that brought gross dishonor to the family name, their shares could be forcibly liquidated by the other members. Stan knew he couldn't just get a divorce. A simple divorce would give Lucy half of his personal assets and leave his father untouched. He needed something more surgical. He needed to wait. He spent the rest of the night dancing, shaking hands, and playing the part of the blissful groom, all while feeling the phantom weight of his father's betrayal like a physical bruise. He watched them exchange a glance over a glass of champagne, a look of shared triumph that made his stomach turn. They thought he was weak. They thought he was the quiet son who wouldn't notice the wolf in the room because the wolf was the one who raised him. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I see the truth." Let's see who is truly following this shocking story of a son's world falling apart. We appreciate you staying with us through these difficult moments in Stan's life. As the wedding night dwindled into the early hours of the morning, Stan made a series of quiet phone calls from his dressing room. He didn't call a friend. He called a specialized private investigator he had used for corporate due diligence. He gave him one instruction: "I need the footage from the estate's library and the master suite from the last 6 months. Don't go through the main security hub. Use the secondary backup server in the basement." Stan knew his father was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. Robert would have deleted the primary logs, but he always forgot about the redundant analog backups installed by Stan's mother years ago. The next morning, the happy couple was scheduled to fly to the Maldives. Stan sat across from Lucy on the private jet, watching her scroll through Instagram, liking photos of their wedding. She looked so innocent in her cashmere travel set, the very picture of a young socialite. Stan held a tablet in his lap, looking at a grainy, time-stamped image sent by his investigator just 10 minutes before takeoff. It was a photo of Lucy and Robert in the library, for months ago. The betrayal was now a digital file. It was no longer a suspicion. It was evidence. "Are you okay, honey?" Lucy asked, reaching out to touch his hand. Her touch felt like a burn. Stan managed a thin smile and nodded. "Just thinking about the future," he replied. He wasn't thinking about a honeymoon. He was thinking about the fact that Robert's tech firm was currently in the middle of a delicate acquisition with a conservative European group. If news of a father-son-wife scandal broke, the deal would vanish, and the board would have the leverage they needed to oust Robert. Stan wasn't just going to leave Lucy. He was going to dismantle the man who thought he could take whatever he wanted. The clock was ticking. The acquisition was set to close in 72 hours. Stan knew he had to play the doting husband for exactly 2 more days in paradise before the trap could be sprung. He watched the clouds through the jet window, realizing that the man who had taught him how to ride a bike and how to read a balance sheet was now his greatest adversary. The power imbalance was still there. Robert had the billions, the history, and the charisma, but Stan had the one thing Robert had lost: the element of surprise. When they arrived at the private island resort, Stan remained distant but polite. He claimed he had to deal with a minor crisis at the Singapore office, spending hours in the villa's study. In reality, he was drafting 2 sets of papers. The first was a petition for an annulment based on fraud. The second was a formal whistleblower complaint to the Thorne Group's ethics committee. He was meticulously documenting every gift Robert had bought Lucy using company funds, the consulting fees Robert had paid her design firm that were actually payments for her silence and her affection. On the second night of the honeymoon, Lucy grew restless. She tried to entice Stan, perhaps feeling the shift in his energy, but he remained a statue of ice. He told her he had a surprise for her, a celebration back in New York involving the whole board and his father. He told her it was the announcement of her new role as the head of the Thorne Foundation. Lucy's eyes lit up with greed. She saw a path to her own independent power, never realizing she was walking straight into a courtroom of public opinion. She called Robert that night, whispering into the phone while she thought Stan was asleep, telling him that the boy was clueless and they were home free. Stan, listening through a baby monitor he'd hidden in the lamp, recorded every word. The flight back to New York was silent. Stan didn't look at her. He was focused on the closing of the acquisition, which was happening in the Thorne Plaza penthouse at 4 p.m. He had timed their arrival perfectly. As the car pulled up to the skyscraper, Lucy was buzzing with excitement, expecting a gala. Instead, she was led into a cold, glass-walled boardroom. Robert was there at the head of the table, looking triumphant, surrounded by 12 grim-faced board members and a team of international lawyers. He smiled at his son, a predatory, fatherly smile. "Glad you could make it, Stan. We're just about to sign." Stan didn't sit down. He walked to the front of the room and placed a flash drive on the polished marble table. "There's a disclosure that wasn't included in the merger filing," Stan said, his voice steady and devoid of emotion. Robert's smile flickered. Lucy narrowed her eyes, her hand tightening on her designer handbag. The room went silent as Stan looked his father in the eye. "It concerns the integrity of the leadership and a gross violation of the moral turpitude clause." The air in the room felt heavy, the ticking of the wall clock echoing like a heartbeat. The collapse was no longer a possibility. It was beginning. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating. Robert Thorne didn't move. He sat with his chin resting on his interlaced fingers, a posture of absolute confidence that had intimidated rivals for 30 years. But as Stan plugged the drive into the central console, a flicker of something, not fear, but a sharp, sudden calculation, crossed the older man's eyes. Lucy, standing by the door, let out a small, nervous laugh that died instantly when the large monitors on the walls flickered to life. She expected to see spreadsheets or acquisition data. Instead, she saw the grain of a security camera from the Thorne estate, time-stamped 3 months ago. The footage was undeniable. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a conversation. On the screen, Robert was handing Lucy a velvet box containing a necklace that cost more than the average American's home. The audio, captured by the redundant system Stan's mother had insisted on, was crisp. "He's a good boy, Robert," Lucy's voice echoed through the boardroom. "But he doesn't have your fire." Robert's reply was a low growl of satisfaction. "He has the name, but I have the kingdom. Just keep him happy until the wedding is over. After that, we won't have to hide." The board members, Men and women in their 60s who had known Robert for decades looked away from the screen in visceral disgust. These were people who valued the Thorn brand's reputation above all else. The European acquisition team, led by a conservative billionaire who prided himself on family values, stood up in unison. Their lead counsel didn't even look at Robert. He simply closed his leather portfolio and said, "The deal is dead. We will be in touch regarding the breach of the key man clause and the misrepresentation of corporate ethics." Robert finally moved. He stood up, his face reddening, his controlled exterior finally cracking. "Stan, turn that off. This is a private matter, a family dispute. You're destroying a $3 billion deal over a misunderstanding." He looked around the room, trying to regain his footing. "Lucy and I were discussing. She was helping me with a surprise for the wedding. This is out of context." But Stan didn't turn it off. He let the footage loop. He wanted his father to see himself not as a titan, but as a thief. He wanted Lucy to see that the fire she admired was currently burning her future to the ground. Lucy stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Stan, listen to me. I was manipulated. Your father, he's powerful, he pressured me. It was a desperate move, an attempt to play the victim." But Stan was already sliding a stack of papers across the table toward her. They weren't just divorce papers. They were a lawsuit for civil fraud and a formal demand for the return of all gifts purchased with Thorn Group funds. "I checked the ledger, Lucy," Stan said, speaking for the first time since the video started. "Every piece of jewelry, every consulting fee my father paid you came from the shareholder dividend account. That's embezzlement. If you don't sign the annulment and the waiver of all marital assets right now, I'm handing this file to the district attorney. If you are still with us and find this story as gripping as we do, please take a moment to drop a comment below. We love reading your thoughts. Tell us, what would you have done in Stan's shoes? Would you have stayed quiet or sought justice? Also, don't forget to hit that notification bell so you're alerted whenever we post a new story. Your support truly keeps us going. Now, let's see how Robert tries to claw his way back from the edge. Robert realized the walls were closing in. He looked at the board members, his old friends, and saw only stone-cold judgment. The chairman of the board, a man who had been Robert's mentor, spoke up. "Robert, under Article 4, Section 9 of the bylaws, you are hereby suspended from all executive duties effective immediately. The moral turpitude clause isn't just a formality. You've compromised the integrity of our largest merger in a decade. You will vacate your office by sunset." Robert's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He had spent his life building a throne, only to realize he had built it on sand that his own son was now washing away. The room cleared quickly. The lawyers and board members filtered out, leaving only Stan, Lucy, and Robert in the glass-walled cage. Lucy was weeping now, not out of regret, but out of the realization that she was leaving this building with nothing but the clothes on her back. She looked at Robert, expecting him to defend her, to promise he'd take care of her. But Robert didn't even look at her. To him, she was now a liability, a piece of evidence he wished he could delete. He looked at Stan, and for the first time, he saw a man who surpassed him. Not in cruelty, but in precision. "You think you've won?" Robert hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and begrudging respect. "You've tanked the stock. You've lost half your inheritance today." Stan stood his ground, leaning against the mahogany table that had once seemed like an altar to his father's ego. "I didn't lose anything, Dad. I paid a price to get you out of my life. The stock will recover because I'm the one who's going to lead the turnaround. The board has already asked me to step in as interim CEO." The irony was a bitter pill. Robert had spent years training Stan to be his successor, and Stan was using every lesson to ensure Robert's exile was permanent. Lucy signed the papers. She had no choice. She walked out of the Thorn Plaza without a single camera following her. Her influencer lifestyle evaporated in a matter of seconds. She had chased the sun and ended up in the shadows. Robert, stripped of his title and his reputation, left through the service elevator to avoid the press that Stan had, accidentally, tipped off about a major leadership change. He retreated to his estate, only to find the locks had been changed. As the sun set over the New York skyline, the billionaire who thought he could have everything found himself standing on a sidewalk, alone, with nothing but a gold watch that had stopped ticking. Stan sat in the quiet of the empty boardroom for a long time. The revenge was complete, and it was as intelligent and earned as he had planned. But as he looked at the wedding ring still on his finger, he felt the heavy weight of the emotional cost. He had saved his company, but he had lost the two people he thought he could trust most in the world. He took the ring off, placed it on the table where the merger papers should have been, and walked toward the door. He wasn't just a good boy anymore. He was a man who knew the value of loyalty because he had seen the true cost of betrayal. Thank you for joining us for this intense journey. This story serves as a powerful reminder that power and wealth are hollow foundations if they aren't built on a bedrock of integrity. Robert and Lucy sought to manipulate a man they perceived as weak, only to discover that true strength often lies in silence and observation. In the end, they lost everything because they underestimated the person they should have valued most. Life has a way of balancing the scales, and as we saw today, the most calculated betrayals often lead to the most absolute collapses. Please, let us know what moral lesson you took from this story in the comments. We look forward to seeing you in our next video. God bless.